We give greetings and thanksgiving to these Potomac River life sources, the Manahoic ancestors, the Rappahannock, Pamunkey, Mattapony, Upper Mattapony, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Nansmond, Monacan, Potawatomi, and Nottoway, past, present, and future, and to the Piscataway tribes who have lived on both sides of the river from time immemorial. I invite you all to acknowledge the indigenous stewards of the land wherever you are by writing their names in the chat. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's artist scholar, Dr. Omi Osun, Joni L. Jones, who has a career marked by a number of incredible achievements and a biography, which I'm going to read an abridged version of at best. Omi brings Black feminist praxis and theatrical jazz principles to her art making, pedagogy, and facilitation. Her dramaturgical work includes August Wilson's Gem of the Ocean and Shay Youngblood's Shaking the Mess Out of Misery, both under the direction of Daniel Alexander Jones, as well as Sharon Bridgeforth's Conflama under the direction of Lori Carlos. Her most recent book is Theatrical Jazz, Performance, Ashe, and the Power for the Present Moment, Ohio State University Press. She is Professor Emerita from the African and African Diaspora Studies Department at the University of Texas at Austin. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Omi Osun, Joni L. Jones. We'll do this.
Hello, everybody.
Nice to see you, Omi.
It's so good to see you, Jola.
It really is a pleasure to speak to you. And I feel like this extends a conversation that gratefully we've been engaged in for a very long time. Mm-hmm. So it's great. I'm going to open up by asking something that I always ask. It's no secret that my first foray into theater involved writing and performing stories inspired by autobiography. But I think all artists bring their own culture, identities, and aspects of their histories and herstories into the studio and the theater. So I'm always interested in how life experience informs work. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the communities you've inhabited, both as a child and as an adult, how they inform the stories you tell.
Wow, okay, sure. You know, sometimes it doesn't always feel like as direct a line, you know, so the places that I inhabited, you're giving me an opportunity to think about how they did shape the things that I do now and how I move in the world now. I grew up in a middle class, working class neighborhood. I am the youngest of 4 daughters. All of us went to college. A couple of us have multiple advanced degrees. So clearly, education was extremely important. And golly, it was fun. I loved being in school. I loved reading. I loved to write. And I'm remembering that when I was in elementary school, I was fortunate enough to have some amazing, creative, loving, generous teachers. And so I always got supported in school. And these were integrated neighborhoods in the late 1950s, early 1960s. I wrote a novel, which makes me, you know. I wrote a novel when I was in elementary school. So that was foreshadowing some things. And I also, in elementary school, I remember directing something called the 6th grade version of the Time Tunnel. And I imagine many of the people on this Zoom conversation don't remember the time tunnel from television. Some of us do. Anyway, it was all wacky and wonky, and we had these flashlights set up to make it look like people were going through a time tunnel. All this. So, now with hindsight, of course, I can see how some of those things laid the foundation, but rooting it in neighborhood, it was a family that supported everything I wanted to do, any and everything. At that time, I used the name Joni. I still do, but many more people know me now as Omi. Anything Joni wanted to do, my parents were down for it. And that's very special. The band, cheerleading, pom pom squad, the whole 9 yards. And being in band meant this whole thing of traveling to competitions. I was on the forensics team. So all of that let me know that things are possible. That was huge.
That is huge. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So the School of Theater here at George Mason is really in the throes of bolstering diversity, equity, and inclusion, like most institutions probably across the country. This guest artist series is an outgrowth of my graduate course, Dramatic Theory and Criticism, Unpacking Race and Power in Contemporary American Theater. The curriculum of that course represents a deliberate departure from the traditional approach to dramatic theory, which centers European scholars, discourse, and modes of making. And my goals are manifold and ambitious, admittedly, but they include developing more awareness of the ways in which the underrepresentation of marginalized voices persists in the American theater, becoming more familiar with artists and scholars of color engaged in conversations for radical change and racial justice, cultivating more comfort and proficiency when discussing race and power, and ultimately identifying and articulating how race, power, and privilege inform our own aesthetics, processes, and practices as theater makers. So you have been engaged in this conversation for a long time. Your life's work centers around the scholarship, or it centers the scholarship and art of people of African descent. I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about how your work shifts the Western paradigm, how in essence it decolonizes pedagogy and production.
Whoa.
I know.
All right, Zola, bring it on. I like the notion that some of what I do and what I'm interested in decolonizes. That's a big order. Mm-hmm. And I think it is so important right now that we examine what that means. It's interesting that we're in a moment where people use the word white supremacy like saying salt or air or, breathing. And it wasn't that long ago that to use that word made you a radical, and you had to kind of say it in hushed terms. So I'm glad we're finally at a moment where we can say those things loudly, and it means re-examining some of the things that we've taken for granted as quote unquote the norm. Yeah. And deeply acknowledging that the norm means a wide range of things around the world. And there are norms within norms. So right. Thinking about decolonizing, I think, is huge and necessary. The way we teach, the way we talk, the way we dress, what we talk about, what languages we use, all of those seemingly everyday activities can be re-examined if we really want to decolonize, The other thing I want to say about the importance of your use of that term is that it means not only looking outward. I think a lot of folk who are thinking about decolonizing, yes, we got to change legislation, no question. Yes, we've got to change policing, no question, all of that. But the perhaps harder part is how have we internalized colonized paradigms in our everyday understanding of ourselves. That's going to be the work. Because if we get to freedom, we don't want to bring all the mess, right? We want to bring decolonized beings as much as we are able. And that's some hard work. to look at how we may be making choices that actually support the very things we say we want to uproot.
All right now.
I think what led me down this road with performance, I moved to Austin, Texas in 1990 to teach at the University of Texas. And I went to this little theater, Hyde Park Theater. Jolie, you have been on that stage.
Yes, I have.
Hyde Park Theater in Austin.
Yeah.
And Daniel Alexander Jones, who somebody told me there's this guy coming to town, and you said, but I didn't. This man got up on that stage, dressed in a silver lame cloth.
Wow.
That barely covered his body. His hair was in a kind of spit curl on his cheek. And I was undone. All he did was walk out because it made me question everything. And that's what I had to do.
Yes.
I rethought gender, race, sexuality, classes, like what? And that's the work. So even though I was terrified by this, because on some level I understood I was going to have to do that with myself, I was going to have to look at all those things in myself because this human being was courageous enough to do it in public.
That's right. That's right.
So it was that. And Daniel is, as you noted in reading my biography or CV or whatever that document was, Daniel is a major practitioner of theatrical jazz. He does work that he also calls Afro-mysticism, and he has 2 new books that are out that I encourage people to take a look at: Love Like Light and Particle and Wave. But Daniel, this man, I've had the pleasure of working with ever since, I now can see that it was that disorientation that led me deeper into what some of us now call theatrical jazz. So
that's right. That's right.
Decolonizing, being utterly uprooted so that we can speak our truths. Each and every one of us can speak our truths, as Daniel did in that moment years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the work right now.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes. Yes. And, one of the reasons I wanted to bring you into conversation as we think about decolonization, and I agree with you 100%, it's like, okay, how do we decolonize ourselves, right? How do we really start to look at how we've internalized these ideas about virtuosity, about excellence, about all those things, right, that we aspire to as artists. But I feel as if theatrical jazz, and I just had a conversation with graduate students this morning. I said, well, I think many of us were doing theatrical jazz before that term even existed or was used. So I feel like it's an important strategy for looking at decolonization, especially of the Eurocentric canon, which is, sadly been most of us have come to think of, well, that's the American canon. Well, is it? Is it? Can we think about expanding that? Let's go into it. How would you define theatrical jazz? What is that for you?
I have grown accustomed to beginning such a definition by saying theatrical jazz is a way of making art and making life. Yeah. And people will say to me, well, what is it? So let me see if I can be even more specific. And as I do that, I'm going to invite everybody not to think of this as a calcified, static form. That everybody does it the same way, and you look at A, B, and C, and that's theatrical jazz. It's not, fortunately, it is not that straightforward or simplistic. It's complicated. You have to pay close attention. So I'll offer some elements that I think are important to many of the forms of theatrical jazz. It has a spiritual base, sometimes directly articulated in the work and other times not. What the work most often calls for is transformation. That undoing that I mentioned in thinking about how I sat there in that theater and didn't even know who I was as Daniel walked out there. Many forms of theatrical jazz invite us to open to that kind of transformation. And for me, that's spiritual work.
Yeah.
It tends to be nonlinear, so it challenges a certain kind of storytelling or narrative making that allows for the past, the present, and the not here yet to all be right here. So we can access it all right now. Because all there really is now. And so we pull all of those things in.
Yes.
It tends to be deeply movement-based and using non-mimetic movement that is not trying to replicate life. And to me, that is so powerful for those of us who identify as Black, maybe for others who identify as people of color, because mimesis has locked us into very narrow ways of thinking about what Black is, the things that harm us, the stereotypes, some would say.
Okay.
So for us, for Black people to traffic in non-mimesis opens up, you got to figure out when I'm talking and I'm doing this, you got to figure out what in the world is going on?
Yes.
And
yes,
those
yes.
are the questions that we need to ask, not to look at something and be so sure we know what it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We've got to ask questions about what we see and feel. So non-mimesis to me becomes important in the work. It tends to be deeply ensemble oriented, so that the way in which people understand themselves in community becomes important. Wynton Marsalis said that the lessons we learn on the bandstand are the lessons that we learn in our everyday. So this thing about ensemble making community, understanding that time is not simply the fixed moment that we may be in, but we're accessing all kinds of times and places simultaneously.
There we go.
All those things are a part of many forms of theatrical jazz and a way to think about living. When I think about my life as accessing all sorts of geographies and times, it changes how I see who I am and what I know is possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm getting a smile from Onawumi, so I'm good.
You're good. Yes. It's good to see that smile and an applause. Hello.
And applause. Oh, an esteemed
Wonderful.
elder and deep friend.
Wonderful.
Knows everything I'm saying already.
Yes. There's something you said. I remember the first time I heard the term non-mimetic movement. I think it was from you. I had to go back and I had to go away and look up what that meant because I thought I understood it, but I realized I was trying to understand it here. But what I understand you talking about is also the intelligence that happens in a good poem. We're not necessarily able to ingest it cognitively, but there is an intelligence in the heart, in the spirit, in the body. And I feel like that's what you're talking about when you talk.
Absolutely.
About this. Yeah.
And the body's intelligence supersedes all the rest of it.
Hello.
You know? And so, I was making up this kind of a movement.
Yeah.
That's what I'm feeling as I'm talking. That's a whole language system that somebody could access and pay attention to, no matter what I'm doing orally or verbally.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Beautiful. So, thank you for that. During our recent panel on Yoruba aesthetics and theatrical jazz, which I think it was just a few months ago only, but
who knows? Time.
Time. It was co-sponsored by the Department of Theater and Africana Studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. organized by our friend and colleague, Professor Judy Abalali. But we spoke about the quote unquote surprising presence of spirituality in art grounded in Yoruba aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think it was only surprising because in academic settings, discussions of spirituality are typically rhetorical or literary. I'm wondering if you would speak a bit more about the presence, even the necessity of spirituality in theatrical jazz.
Wow. I wrote a book and I featured Daniel Alexander Jones, Laurie Carlos, and Sharon Bridgeforth, my partner. And I started the book with a quotation from Sekou Sundiata, who said, "The goal is God."
Yes.
Now, whatever you think of as God, and maybe there isn't a God or multiple gods or a supreme being for you, but maybe it's a tree or the river, whatever.
Yeah.
The truth of that is what undergirds theatrical jazz. That the goal is for us to connect with divinity, with the divinity in ourselves and the divinity in others, in all that is.
Okay.
The river, the tree, the air, so forth. So that's one way for me to respond, Jola, to your question about how does spirituality situate itself in theatrical jazz. It is the force of it. Jola, I know that you have this incredible role now, and I don't know how much people know of you as a performer. So I just want to say there's a wonderful video, and I may ask you to show it to your graduate students at least, of Jola and several other performers in Austin, Texas, in a production of Sharon Bridgeforth's Blood Pudding.
Mm.
And my sense of that production is that the moment that audience witnesses walk into this somewhat dimly lit performance space with these shadows on the floor that look like a veve.
Veves, yep.
With people dressed in various shades of white, which for many of us evokes a spiritual reality right away. People moving in a circle, which suggests ring shout. To see you and all of those other folk in that work, for some of us, it was a spiritual experience just seeing those bits. You didn't have to say a word, just that. So the bodies were creating a spiritual reality in the way they moved, in the way they were dressed. And I wanna deviate just a little bit from your question, but bring me back. And I want to take a little bit of a detour.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've talked about the necessity of spirituality in theatrical jazz, which we've talked a little bit about. The necessity of spirituality in pedagogy.
Yeah.
Our classrooms are these sacred spaces. And in spite of how conservative our institutions may be, when we close that door, nobody really knows what we're doing up in there. and hopefully we are bringing our bests as teachers, as educators. We've done some internal work.
Yes.
So we're not just spewing our own pain and our egos onto these students, but we can use that as a space for helping them transform so that they too are meeting their highest good. They're meeting whatever that means for them, being their best selves. So there's a way in which I'm excited to see how spirituality, and again, I'm not thinking of that as religion per se, but this sense that we are all joined, that we are the land, that there is no separation.
Right.
That we can bring that into our classrooms. That would change everything. Students would be less inclined to think of our classes as simply a stepping stone to a job, and more about what it means to be human.
That's right.
And of course, many of us are doing that. But I want to take this opportunity to invite everyone to consider every time we step in a room and open our mouths as a teacher, we are transforming the molecules in that room. We're setting up a whole other set of things.
Yeah.
That's powerful and beautiful and necessary. And if we take it on as a spiritual act, regardless of what that term spiritual means to you, it will shift how we engage with the students. It might encourage us to relinquish the imposition of being all-knowing.
Yes.
And be curious right along with our students. So I know I took us away from where you started.
I think that, well, it feeds directly into the next question, which you have answered partially, but I just wanted, since you brought up blood pudding and that experience in Austin for me, that was a turning point for me as a theater artist. It was the first time, one, I was embodying the words of our beloved Sharon Bridgeforth. It was also the first time I had worked with Lori Carlos. And all of those things, I was also going through an intense breakup. So I was open within my own grieving process to a whole host of different energies that I had not been open to before. But all of those things converged. And I say it's a turning point because it's the first time I remember setting foot on the stage and opening to character. I had, I had been taught, trained to wear a mask. But as you know, Lori will say, you gotta open that, you gotta open that shit up, right? And open to what you have brought into this process, into this room, because we're all responding to it already. So just go ahead and name it, hold it, use it, all of that. Yeah.
Oh, golly.
Yeah. So it was a pivotal moment for me.
That was beautiful, Jola. I'm glad you shared that story.
Yeah.
I didn't know all that was going on for you at the time.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
And then, there's some things going on in Austin, which is a whole nother conversation.
Well, I'm retired from the University of Texas, and I am in deep solidarity with my former colleagues there who are in a state in the union that has lost its natural mind.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Has lost its mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity to share it. I was going to ask how your work in the theater informs your work in the classroom. You started to answer it. I don't know if you want to.
I can say more.
Yeah. And I use the term classroom very loosely here. It could be boardrooms, kitchens, porches, however you see it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I can say a little bit about that. In the last few years of teaching at UT, I began starting my classes with some meditation. And I didn't use that word. We would breathe together. It was a way to sync up. And it was initially surprising how many students would come up to me after class, oh, that was so good, that was so useful, or I had an exam last week, and I did that right before the exam, and all of those things. And I thought, people are hungry for being present. They really want to be present. And that allowed me to learning that, realizing that with the students, encouraged me to do more. So in the last years at UT, one of the large lecture courses that I taught was African American culture, Introduction to African American culture. I used Nell Painter's Creating African Americans. Nell Painter is a historian. She is also a painter. And what she did with this wonderful book was to have artwork virtually on every page. So as you move through a historical understanding of African Americans, you are invited to think about it symbolically, aesthetically, through the artwork that was there. So I had students in this class, probably maybe 10 of them identified as artists, writing poems, creating raps. There was one assignment where a group of students brought in a pie and told the story of Juneteenth.
Love it.
what I thought was powerful about that, and of course there were some students who didn't get it and resisted it, and okay. What I thought was powerful about their choices was that they came to see that education was more holistic. It was not only reading in a book and then writing about what you read. Those are useful skills, but they are not the only skills that we're going to need. Mm-hmm. And indeed, those skills have only taken us so far. Mm-hmm. So for them to know that making a pie, writing a poem, some people did a fashion show, that was an important way to understand oppression, resistance, fugitivity, hegemony, all those things that were taught, those concepts that were taught in the class got played out in the body through experience. So those are the ways that I have been bringing theatrical jazz into the class, is to make art making a part of whatever I'm teaching.
That's beautiful. So inviting them to bring wherever they are and whatever their process, their artistic expression is, into the room. I feel like, we've already brought her name into the room, Lori Carlos, the late, great Lori Carlos, who was a friend and mentor to us both. One thing she said to me was to lead with what you're for rather than what you're against. This, of course, was a lesson in energy and vibration. So if I'm constantly telling you what I'm against, I'm constantly giving the thing more power and energy. Right. So inadvertently, I'm calling into being the very thing I do not want.
Exactly.
Right? That lesson, like so many, has stayed with me. And while I use the familiar term anti-racist theater, I struggle with it. I wonder if it derails the intention of creating the kind of inclusive theater that most folks listening to this conversation agree we are attempting to create. Mm-hmm. I wonder if we could kick it around a bit. What is anti-racist theater to you? What theater excites you most? Who's creating theater that inspires you, past, present, possibly future, and why?
You led this beautifully by questioning the term anti-racist, because it does then foreground what we say we don't want. So when I think about anti-racist theater, and you hooked it to what do I find exciting? What kind of theater?
Yeah.
I am not particularly interested in didactic theater, where the notion of oppression and the notion of resistance are what's being played out. I think that work can be very important.
Yeah.
It's just not the work that I am called to do, and not the work I typically go to. Not surprising, perhaps, given what I've said about non-mimetic movement. I am particularly excited by dance these days, and what choreographers and movers are offering us in their bodies as ways of being. And dance more and more has included verbal narratives, but less linked to a particular story, less linked to what's going on physically or spatially in the space. And I find all of that intriguing. I'm still sitting with this anti-racist theater. My mind, my spirit keeps going back there, because
it's all right. It's all right.
It's a challenge. So the other way to approach your question, because this was part of it too, work that says we are all in this together. We are all here. We got to work this out together. That appears to be the mandate.
Right.
Why put all of these various human beings in this location on the planet Earth, if part of the invitation, maybe even requirement, is not to figure out how to be here together.
Hello.
So theater or dance or visual art or music that offers that up is exciting to me. When you quoted Lori as lead with what you're for, not with what you're against, I think leading with love, which sounds, I think, trivial to some people, lightweight, not sophisticated, naive, just the hardest thing we can do, because that's the thing we've not tried on a global level persistently.
Right.
Leading with love. How does that change everything?
Right. I like that. But, sometimes the simplest notion is the most sophisticated and the most difficult to embody. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So I've just got a couple more questions. They're big questions, but many have called the sort of intense protests for racial justice of the past year and a half sort of a long awaited reckoning. And I think those protests have emboldened the left and the right to be more vocal about their beliefs and their stance. But many of us have explored race, power, privilege in our work for decades. But there definitely seems a tipping point. It seems more artists are, we talked about how people now will say white supremacy quite openly and frequently sometimes. But it seems more artists are talking overtly about social inequities on and off the stage, that theater is positioned as a place to springboard many of those discussions, excuse me. I'm wondering if the current tide has impacted your own work. I know that you're retired from the University of Texas, but you are still working. Has it changed the way you think about theater in relation to national or global events? And if so, how?
I haven't made much theater during this current moment. What I would do, I think, if I were to do some creating myself rather than being in someone else's piece, and it is in part things that I have been doing, I think theater has a unique opportunity in the world of performance because it is live to take advantage of those live bodies that are there. Invite them to do more than sit. How do they get to put their voices, animate their bodies, tell their stories perhaps? How do they get to contribute more of themselves to the act of theater that they came to perhaps just sit and watch? I used this image earlier about molecules and shifting molecules. I've been very excited by the notion of resonant frequencies from physics, which I'm not a physicist, so I will explain this as best as I understand it. It is the ability for molecules to have an impact on one another as they vibrate at the same frequency. So we theater makers, we have all these live bodies sitting there. What happens if they get up and move? What more of them, their spirits, gets put on the line when they are invited to engage in those deeply embodied ways? So I would want to create that. So it might feel like an installation. It might feel like literally a movement. Because I think that that's where the work is going to really happen. It's going to happen viscerally. It will need to happen. And I rarely talk about things in such a firm, knowing way, but it will need to happen physically, psychically, not only intellectually, not only in terms of legislation. We've had a whole lot of legislation that didn't fully get inside of the psyche or the bodies of people.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if we were living out the legislation, I don't think we'd be facing the problems that we are facing right now. We'd be in a whole other zone.
Yeah.
So I think this is an opportunity for the work that we're making to really honor the people who are there with their individuality and the communalness of being together by asking more of them than only sitting and watching.
Yeah. I love that. Love that. I'm going to save my other question and open us up for questions. Allow you to have a conversation with the broader community who's on this call. I invite folks to shift your screen to gallery view so that we can all see each other. And if you have a question, you can certainly raise the little virtual hand on the little tile here on the screen. I'll try to respond to you, or you could write it in the chat if you feel more comfortable, because this is about also invoking community. I invite you all to turn your cameras on if you feel comfortable doing so. And we will take it from there. It's great. I see a lot of familiar faces and some new ones. That's exciting. Yeah.
I see some faces that look familiar, but it's like, do I know this person? I think I know this person.
You might.
Yeah.
We have a question from Phil Wilkerson. I will give you the floor, sir.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. Shout out to Austin, Texas. It's one of my favorite cities in the United States. I got a little inside story for that later that I'll share with you.
Okay.
Nice.
But in regards to those, like I work as an industry advisor. So I work with students in regards to employment. And I'm just curious to both of your thoughts on how can stakeholders that are not directly tied to the arts support endeavors that are artistic, as well as, the anti-racism efforts that the theater world is doing. So basically, how can someone like me as an industry advisor or anyone else on campus, other campus partners, how can we support or help, or what does that look like?
Can I ask you a question? And it's Phil. Phil, do you go by Phil or Philip?
I go by either way. As long as they don't call me Linwood when I'm in trouble. That's when I'm in trouble. I get the full.
Is that what your mama calls you when you're in trouble?
Call me Philip, it doesn't matter.
Phil, will you say a little bit more about what an industry advisor is? Are you advising specifically students going into theater, or?
Yeah, so I work in career services. This is like, if I was on Spotlight, I better talk about my job correctly. So I work at the Career Center here on campus. And as an industry advisor, my title, I'm an industry advisor for media, arts, design, sports and rec, and hospitality and tourism. So what that means is that I support both students as well as employers. So for the students, I help them make sure their resume, cover letter, portfolio, all those things are presentable, give them advice in that realm. For employers, I'm making sure that they're posting jobs on Handshake or connecting with the talented students here at Mason in regards to the media, arts, design, sports and rec, and hospitality and tourism. I don't work specifically with any school. I work with any student, regardless of their major, if they're interested in media, arts, design, sports and rec, and hospitality. So I've worked with an English student that says, hey, I want to get into journalism. I worked with the dance students. I work with the graphic design students. I work with all kinds of different students that are interested in those industries. And I'm not aesthetically talented or artistic at all, but they have helped me over time. I know the lingo. I know the words that you need to say and the industry knowledge by working with the students over time. But that's what I do as an industry advisor. Basically, it's just a career coach for a specific niche.
So can I jump in there too?
Please.
Phil? Because I think that, what Phil is not saying is that he's also a community builder, an advocate, and a lot of folks in this community at Mason have connected because of his outreach and efforts. And I would say certainly that's one way that you can support the arts in general, theater in particular. When we're doing a show that offers opportunities for conversations like this across difference about diversity, equity, hit your listserv up, tell your people to come out and support the work, right? But I'm sorry, I jumped in there. Go ahead, Omi.
No. I that's almost exactly what I was going to say, to support the work. The only thing I might add is that supporting the work might look a lot of different ways. Sure, yes, come to the work when it is being presented. There may be other ways to support the work, particularly, Phil, since you have these community connections. I know that when I was still teaching, a lot of the advising was into the so-called entertainment industry. Not everybody needs to be up in there. That is not necessarily a healthy place, or the appropriate place for certain kinds of work. So I maybe even using your community connections to help students understand that their visions can be broader than Broadway and Hollywood and the Goodman, and that there's so much other art to be made. And golly, at the high school level and elementary level, again, I know that much of the training that goes on at universities is about those big regional theaters and so forth. But there are some of those students at those universities who are just right for teaching elementary school students performance, or teaching high school students, or after school programs, and that's not a demotion of some sort.
There you go. Yeah.
So if you could help them to really follow what they really want to do and not try to get to Broadway, unless that's what they really want to do.
Unless that's what they want. Yeah.
Yeah. If that is their heart's desire, yes. But my guess is for many of them, that's sort of that's the path that they sort of know, and they don't know the rich joy of doing work in other contexts.
Well said. Thank you. That's great. So we're going to see you at the next show, right, Phil? Okay.
Hey, I'm waiting for them tickets. You already said, you already know. I told you.
Yeah, all right. Okay.
He got you.
You did. All right, I'll hook you up. Fine.
And Phil, bring 10 high school students with you.
Oh, I could do that too. You know that. Like, I got the connects with especially Mount Vernon. But
yes, thank you.
Definitely.
No, thank you, Phil. Thank you for the work that you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Rex, I see your hand up here.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Omi and Jola. Thank you so much for this chance to speak with you both. It's so inspiring to hear about your work and your background. And so thank you for chatting with us. I'm one of Jola's grad students in his course right now. And we were just reading through a little bit of your book, Theatrical Jazz. And I mean, I love how and even in the conversation now of talking about the spirituality in your work. And for me, theater is also a very spiritual experience as well. And my question is about, I'm also a theater maker and producer here in Washington, DC area. And so I'm constantly thinking about the audience because as a producer, you must. And I'm just curious about your experience of how do you invite audience members into a ritual practice? Particularly if you're just getting those single ticket buyers who may not have ever come to your company before. How do you sort of prepare them to enter perhaps a different space than they might be used to at the Kennedy Center, where you might, sit and watch a very pretty, beautifully done Bach show. But how do you prep and invite audience members in to participate as a ritual?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a really good question. As you were asking that question, I was thinking a lot about Sharon Bridgeforth's work, which many people have described as ritual. The production that Jola and I were talking about, Blood Pudding, is one of them. I'll offer this, and if it's useful, great. If not, you'll find a way. I wonder if the preparation, because I'm not sure that the preparation can happen before they get to the place. And as a producer, I know I'm sure you're thinking about those flyers that are going out, the mailings and the emails and all those things. So maybe there is language in there that probably doesn't use the word ritual or ceremony or spirit, but maybe uses words like community and gathering and those kinds of things. But you might think about, my daughter did this with a show that she created, and Sharon does it all the time. What if, as people are walking, you're in DC, so this would have to happen only at certain times of the year. But if, as people are walking to the theater on the sidewalk, maybe something is happening there that they get to engage with. Maybe it's even company members who are out there doing I don't know what. But that is likely to cue them into some. This isn't the Kennedy Center as it is usually, understood. And then certainly those wonderful lobby spaces. One of the things I love to do is to do lobby displays and have people do things, and they had to, all of that. So that by the time they sit in their seat, they've already had a quote unquote different experience. They've already been invited to do something other than sit only and watch. In some work that my daughter did, she had the whole side, you walked the whole sidewalk and there were different things that you could do, including you could get a kind of tarot reading. So people were recognizing right away that it was different. So by the time she invited some people to come on stage and help her make mimosas that were then passed out to everybody, or when she invited the entire group of audience witnesses onto the stage and she taught us a dance, and we all, fumbled our way through, and, some people had mimosas, so they were a little more willing perhaps than they might have been otherwise. But my point is simply that prior to actually hitting that entrance into the theater space, use of the lobby, use of the external, the sidewalk and other external areas might be useful. And words like a gathering, even kind of a 60s word, a happening, will help them to know that this may ask something different of me. Yeah. I'd also say, Rex, when you send out those materials inviting people to come to your productions, maybe referencing this is a time for us to gather, to be real human with each other. If that language, if that sits with you or whatever, let's be human together. So then they know it's an invitation to do something somewhat different than what they may have anticipated.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you. I love that.
And I would just, reiterate, your partner, Sharon Bridgeforth, she's a master at this. I remember, was it River Sea in Boston, where we led the audience into a procession that was akin to second line. I mean, she's drawing from traditions in which ritual is foundational, right? Or the way you set up and configure the audience so that performers can, for example, in that particular production, it was set up as a crossroads. So the audience was on 4 different sides of this cross, this intersection where performers could go in and out of the center. But that way we could draw, because I remember, was it Sandra who had some woman who sat at her feet and basically talked to her as if she were an elder. And
Yeah.
so there are a lot of different strategies. I would say, Rex, to add to what Omi offers here, look at traditions in which ritual, right, is at the core, you know, and figure out which of those work.
Mm-hmm. And which ones suit the company members that you're working with?
Hey, there you go. Yeah, thank you. I see a hand over here. Caitlin, hello. Good to see you again.
Hello, my friend. Thank you so much. Thank you both so much for this extraordinary opportunity. First of all, to lead with a love. I'm right there with you. I wrote down as I was listening, we're examining a lot of our practices here. And as we're looking at how we select our season, you know, I'm at Texas State University, and I think we're the second largest theater department in the country now. And we are serving a global majority. 56% of the students here are BIPOC. And thank you for asking that question about anti-racist theater, because it's become such a buzzword and such a, I don't know, everybody's leading with that, right? We're all sort of leading with, we're producing anti-racist theater, you know, but we're not really questioning and even unpacking that and what that brings. So my question is, as we're selecting our seasons and we're looking at how do we produce more inclusive, more equitable theater, what is the criteria that you would like to see to answer that question of how we serve all of our students in a more equitable, just, and inclusive way? What criteria should we be using to answer those questions in selecting material, casting, all of the things that go along with selecting a season, right? It's would love anything you could offer.
I will take a stab at it, and that is the question, right? So we're in many places feel they're in a dilemma. So what do we do? That's the thing. And how do we do it so that we are not reinforcing the anti-racism that we want to undo? I'll say a number of things. I don't know if any of them will suit the realities of Texas State. I do also want to say, though, there is a new professor in the Department of English, Drea Brown. Have you met Drea yet?
No, but I will be.
Yeah, they are a amazing poet and scholar. Did her PhD at UT. So, and they are there. I'm trying to learn new ways. They are there, and I know they would be really interested in performance. They were in my performance classes, so anyway, all right. Some of what I'm going to suggest may be really time intensive. Some of that means talking with the students about this moment and how might they want to proceed. I don't know if Texas State has students on their season selection committee. And I don't know if there are organizations amongst the students, theater organizations amongst the students that meet and so on. So, but somehow inviting them into the consideration in a broad way and being explicit about we're not only inviting your input because we want to know your input anyway, but because this is a particular moment where your input would help us to have a vision where we may have blinders on. You know, I think part of why I'm challenged a bit by the question, it's a beautiful question. I don't even know if I believe in a season. You know what I mean? I don't even know if I believe in a
Yes,
season
ma'am.
selection. Do you know what I mean? So it's like a
Yes,
season
ma'am.
selection. Maybe another way to even think about a season is, who are the voices that your community wants to engage with?
Yeah.
And whether it turns out that's two quote unquote playwrights, or maybe one is a visual artist and the other is a community organizer, then how does that get to constitute a so-called season? Who do you want to be in? Who do you want to dialogue with?
Mm-hmm.
And that actually sounds very exciting. I would love to be part of that.
Yeah.
Can you imagine bringing in the head of the NAACP as the person who's going to be in conversation with everybody? And, I don't know. Think big. Kara Walker. You know?
Yes.
Yeah. But I have some trouble even thinking about season, because what that meant at the University of Texas was a group of people, and I was sometimes on the committee, would sit around and we would decide, well, how many majors do we have? Who are those majors? How are we going to do the gender assignments? And so we have to have enough plays to have the majority of the women, because we have more women than men. And now all of that, women, men, people have to rethink all of that, right? And that was a completely, I don't know, almost career-driven way to think about what making theater is. What if it is? Who are the people we want to be in conversation with? And what if it has to be text-based, what texts arise from wanting to talk with those people? Mm-hmm. So if Kara Walker is the person, and you all had the delight to get her in conversation, then are there some texts that allow you to chew on some of the ideas that came up with her? Or if it's the head of the NAACP, perhaps that person gets to be the consultant on the entire season. I don't know. But part of what I think I'm finally landing on is to reimagine what we even mean by a season, and to let it be guided by who we want, what we want to be exploring right now.
Yeah.
What do we want to be exploring? I hope that's helpful.
It's incredibly helpful, and thank you so much for that. I took a lot of notes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you both. I see a hand from Nicholas. Hello.
Hi. I just wanted to return briefly. I put it in the chat too, just so that I could kind of formulate it. But the idea was that I very much appreciated this idea of leading with love, and Jola, manifesting what you want to see rather than what you don't.
Yeah.
And these ideas, I think, are very important. And I'm reminded of the opposite of the shadow of leading with fear, which we see so often, and the very wide manifestations of fear in our culture. And I think about work I've been reading recently in terms of fear in the body and somatic abolitionism. Mm-hmm. This idea that we have to banish fear from the collective, from the community, actively in the body, in the culture. And I'm wondering if you could just give us a little guidance, Omi, from your perspective, and Jola, of course, jump in too, as to how to create the conditions for such an abolitionism. What does that look like? Thank you.
I'll jump in, Jola, and then you pick up, because this will help me continue to think about Caitlin's question. What if the work that is produced directly, consciously, publicly invited the bodies that are present to perform bodies across those identities. It's not a new idea. My dear friend and mentor, Robbie McCauley, who also just passed a few months ago, did this work regularly. She did a production of Streetcar Named Desire where she cast Stanley as a Black man. I was like, whoa, okay. Ha! And I saw that production, and she was very clear. There were lots of people of color who were also in the work, but Blanche and Stella were white. So what I'm offering is dangerous, maybe in really wonderful ways. But I wonder, Nick, if there is a way to take the fact of our bodies and their histories and stories and consciously layer onto them histories and stories that are not those bodies. And let's see where we are. Perhaps this is more appropriate in certain ways for classroom rather than public presentation, where you can, then you're going to come back the next day and then you can talk, and then you're going to come back the next day, so forth and so on. There's also, Drea is one of the co-editors of a book that is coming out called Teaching Black. And there are a number of people in there who are performers. So there may be some interesting ideas for many of you in that book. And that, I think, it may be out in November. But I'll be in touch with Jola, and Jola will know when it comes out.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
I think that the work that's happening with somatic abolitionism is extremely important. I don't know that we can eradicate fear, but what I take away from somatic abolitionism is, oh, at least I can know when it's rising up. It's like, okay, I know what my physical triggers are, so then I can make another set of choices. I have been using recently, I am breathing in, I am breathing, I just feel like, I am breathing in, I'm breathing out. To try to just bring me to being present again and not in the story that's not even happening right now, but is making me anxious right now. So I'm not sure that, well, it certainly is a messy answer in that if one were to take up those choices, boy, oh boy, in bits and pieces with a lot of love and generosity. And again, maybe this is not where you do it in public production, but I'm telling you, Robbie McCauley did this at a university at Emerson when she was at Emerson.
Yeah.
And yeah.
It's repathologizing our stories. It's great. It's great. Thank you.
Well, and there are some artists doing this work across the country. I'm thinking of our friend, Kim Moore, who teaches a class called Acting Outside the Box, in which she deliberately asks students to cast roles across their own gender, racial, ethnic identities, right? And then within the sort of dramaturgy of creating that role and embodying that role, to increase, expand understanding. I agree, it's probably easier in classrooms, but not impossible, certainly in production. And a lot of these artists that we've been talking about who practice theatrical jazz, are deliberately casting across gender, race, ethnicity, right? Because, we will bring our culture, experience, histories into the experience of receiving the work anyway, but each of us will have a slightly different take on the work. I think that's exciting. I think that it's very complicated, obviously, because I think BIPOC students have waited so long to see work that represents their specific experience that asking them now to think outside that, or asking someone who is outside your experience is like, wait a minute, that's my story. Why are you taking my story now? But I think within classrooms, we can create opportunities for increased understanding and empathy, right? By exploring some of those things. And it relates back to the conversation we started this with very early on, decolonizing ourselves. What images have we internalized? What stereotypes have we internalized? And how do we give ourselves freedom to explore outside of the ways we've internalized those images? I hate that we're running out of time. Maybe one more question before we say goodbye to our guest artist for the day.
Can I throw one thing in very quickly? Because
Yeah.
And then we can take the one more question or whatever. If you are excited by, and even perhaps terrified by, some of what Yola and I are suggesting as possible options for doing the work in responsible ways, you might think of it as a long-term strategy, 3-5 years, something. So that in the first year, you want to create productions that move in this direction, or hint at it, or touch on it, or taste, and let the audience witnesses know, we are imagining theater as a community gathering place.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we're launching that with this, so that they know some change. And so then by the time you get to year number 3, where you've incrementally increased the amount of that, by year number 3, then you're casting Stanley as someone who is Latinx. So
yes.
But maybe not in year 1.
It's a process.
Mm-hmm.
Our elders in the room, I'm wondering if you wanted to say anything before we leave, Onawumi. You don't have to, but I'm offering you the opportunity. You have to unmute yourself, though. There you go.
Hallelujah, thine the glory. Hallelujah, amen.
Hey.
Hallelujah, thine the glory.
Hey.
Theater revive our soul again.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Decolonize. Address didactic theater as the thing that needs to be examined, explored, embodied. Know that we are spirits. That is what spiritual is. We are spirit encased in shelf-limited bodies.
Yes.
And that what we do is what is left, called legacy.
Hey.
That is what lasts. That is why no thing that you might fear can be left untouched. White supremacy has to be not left untouched or treated casually. Love has so many elements to it. What is love? What has love got to do with it?
Hey.
These are questions that have to be asked.
Yeah.
To get rid of fear is an interesting quest. But what does fear do when you need to move, but you don't know how to do it? You get out the way. You ought to have a way to kind of understand what your compass was. Everything you have said, this has been ooh, this has been church revival.
Yes.
I love you. I don't know you, but I love you.
Yes.
This has, my Lord. Thank you for letting me say a few words. There's so much that you have said that, you know, the contradictions, the going up against things, to going in yourself and going up against yourself where you've been lying to yourself about a lot of stuff, about a lot of stuff. Stop lying to yourself. Stop lying to yourself so you can get to the other stuff.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lori, I'm just going to say this. Lori once said to me, a group I was in here in Amherst, Massachusetts, where I am now, Amherst, Massachusetts. She said, I want you to go out on this campus. We were at Amherst College where I know everybody. And she said, I don't want you to speak to one person on this campus because I want you to focus on why you are here. Who are you here? I went out on campus, everybody in the world spoke to me. I didn't speak to them. One of them is still here. He is a great professor, international. I didn't speak to him. He's from Nigeria. He never let me forget it. But I later understood it. It took me years to understand, but that by doing that in silence, I was becoming a warrior. I love you. I love you. Thank you, Jola. Thank you for coming into my life, Jola. Thank you for coming into my life.
Thank you. Well, that's a good place to
Did she mute
pause.
herself?
Did she mute herself? That's
Oh.
okay.
No, okay.
No, I did I mute myself?
No, you're good.
Okay.
I just want to say many thanks to George Mason School of Theater, Mason Players for Change, and the Friends of Theater for their support in publicizing this event. Special shout out to our interim program director, Nick Horner. Thanks, Nick, for working behind the scenes and keeping all the logistics on track. Thank you, thank you. Again, thanks to Dr. Omi Osun, Joni L. Jones, whom I hope to see live and in person at some point in the very near future. And last but not least, thanks to all of you for being present today. This conversation is ongoing. My hope is that some seeds have been planted today, which will flourish and grow. All of you take good care.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you. This is what we need to be doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jola, for holding this space. Thank you.
Thank you. Ciao.
Thank you, Jola. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Onaomi.